October 14, 1943, 15,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany. A German fighter pilot's pen moved steadily across the worn leather of his logbook, documenting what appeared to be just another ordinary combat entry. Another B-17 Flying Fortress had been added to his tally, his 17th heavy bomber kill, now spiraling downward through layers of black smoke and desperate hope. Below him, through the bubble canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190, he observed the remaining American bombers struggling to hold their tight formation together. Their defensive gunners unleashed stream after stream of 50-caliber rounds into the sky, firing at shadows where German interceptors had been mere moments before. The brutal calculus of aerial warfare was unforgiving and simple. German pilots held every advantage. They could choose when to strike, position themselves between the sun and their prey, and vanish before American gun crews could effectively track them. The American bombers flew without fighter protection, transformed into nothing more than valuable but defenseless targets. That morning, 201 B-17 Flying Fortresses had crossed into German airspace with a single objective: destroy the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt. By the time darkness fell, 60 of them would never see England again. Another 17 returned so severely crippled they would be scrapped the moment they touched down. To the German pilots celebrating that evening, it felt like a turkey shoot. To the Americans counting their losses, it became Black Thursday, the most catastrophic day in 8th Air Force history. What neither side grasped in that moment of German victory was that such triumphs would soon become increasingly rare. In just 4 months, the entire air war would shift fundamentally. German fighter pilots in late 1943 possessed every reason to feel invincible. Officers like Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, Adolf's older brother, Major Georg Peter Eider, and Major Walter Dahl had transformed bomber interception into a precise and deadly craft. Their tactics had evolved through months of successful combat, refined to exploit specific weaknesses in American formations. The standard three-dimensional combat box, 18 to 21 bombers arranged defensively, had been built on the theory that concentrated defensive firepower could neutralize fighter attacks. Each B-17 carried 13 50-caliber machine guns, theoretically creating fields of fire across every conceivable approach angle. German pilots, however, had discovered critical vulnerabilities. They identified blind spots near the nose, tracked ammunition consumption, and understood the psychological toll of relentless assault. Hauptmann Heinz Knoker, commanding 5JG-11, had perfected the head-on attack that exploited the B-17's single greatest weakness. Starting with his first heavy bomber victory on February 26, 1943, a B-24 Liberator named Maisie, he had systematized the kill. By October, 16 more bombers fell to his technique. His method operated with mechanical precision. Approach from directly ahead and slightly above, descend through the formation at 400 miles per hour, fire a 2-second burst aimed at cockpit and engines, then accelerate away before top turret gunners could respond. The numbers vindicated German confidence. During the first Schweinfurt raid on August 17, 1943, Luftwaffe fighters downed 60 bombers, 16% of the attacking force. American losses had been so severe that strategic bombing operations were suspended for weeks while commanders reassessed tactics. When deep raids resumed with the October 14th strike on Schweinfurt, the devastation intensified. 77 bombers were destroyed or damaged beyond repair, with over 600 airmen killed or captured in a single day. Major Günther Schacht, commanding JG-11's 3 Staffel, had pioneered the company front attack. 8 FW-190s approaching line abreast, overwhelming the bombers' defensive guns with simultaneous targets from multiple vectors. The psychological impact shattered morale. American gunners confronting 8 fighters converging at a combined closing speed of 600 miles per hour faced impossible choices in mere seconds, often firing wildly without striking anything. American vulnerability stemmed from a fundamental problem in physics. No Allied fighter possessed sufficient range to escort bombers throughout their penetrations into German territory. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, America's primary escort fighter, carried a combat radius of only 375 miles with drop tanks, sufficient to reach Germany's border but not beyond it. The twin-engine Lockheed P-38 Lightning could operate at greater distances, yet suffered from mechanical failures at high altitude in European conditions, with engines dying and control surfaces freezing. This single limitation meant American bombers flew their most critical legs over the German heartland completely unprotected. Luftwaffe interceptors simply waited beyond Allied escort range, then concentrated their forces for devastating attacks. German pilots referred to the moment when Allied fighters turned back as the golden moment. Oberleutnant Hans Philipps, who would accumulate 206 confirmed victories before his own death in October 1943, explained the tactic in post-war interviews. "We monitored the bomber streams through our radar network, calculating precisely where their fighter escorts would reach their fuel limits. The instant those little friends departed, we attacked. The bomber crews understood their peril and tightened formation instinctively. The mathematics proved deadly. A B-17 formation might endure 4 hours of combat exposure, yet receive fighter cover for only 90 minutes. German pilots could attack, return to base, refuel, rearm and launch again, while their American targets still struggled homeward." Experienced Luftwaffe pilots flew 3 or 4 separate missions against a single raid, exponentially multiplying their killing power. Development of the P-51 Mustang had begun not from American ambition, but from British necessity. During April 1940, representatives from the British Purchasing Commission approached North American Aviation requesting additional P-40 fighters. North American declined and instead proposed designing an entirely new fighter aircraft within 120 days. The resulting NA-73X first took flight on October 26, 1940, a remarkable feat of accelerated engineering. The early versions, powered by the Allison V1710 engine, excelled at lower altitudes but faltered above 15,000 feet, precisely where bomber escorts were needed. The RAF deployed these early Mustangs for tactical reconnaissance and ground support, roles perfectly suited to their exceptional range and low-altitude characteristics. The transformation that altered the entire air war came from unexpected collaboration between American and British engineers. In April 1942, RAF test pilot Ronald Harker flew an Allison-powered Mustang and immediately perceived its extraordinary potential. The airframe possessed superior aerodynamic efficiency, sleeker even than the legendary Spitfire. The solution lay in a different engine. Harker advocated installing the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, the same 2-stage supercharged power plant that equipped the latest Spitfire variants. When the first Merlin-powered Mustang flew in October 1942, the transformation proved extraordinary. Maximum velocity climbed from 390 to 440 miles per hour. More significantly, high-altitude performance shifted from inadequate to exceptional. Service ceiling increased from 31,000 to 42,000 feet. The union of American manufacturing muscle with British engine expertise had produced capabilities neither nation could achieve independently. The P-51B's true revolution transcended mere performance numbers. Range became the defining feature. 3 factors worked in combination. First came exceptional aerodynamic efficiency from its laminar flow wing, maintaining smooth airflow across greater wing surface than conventional designs. Second was internal fuel capacity of 184 gallons, housed in an exceptionally light, efficient airframe compared to the P-47's 305-gallon capacity in a heavier structure. Third was the ability to carry external drop tanks while maintaining excellent performance. The laminar flow wing, designed by North American's engineers, sustained smooth air movement far back along its surface compared to traditional wing designs. This reduced drag by nearly 30%, translating directly into superior fuel consumption. Where a P-47 burned 100 gallons per hour at cruise, a P-51 consumed merely 65 gallons at identical speed. With 75-gallon drop tanks added to P-51Bs in early 1944, combat radius expanded to 650 miles. The introduction of 108-gallon tanks in March 1944 stretched radius to 850 miles, sufficient distance to reach Berlin, conduct 20 minutes of combat, and return safely to England. No other single-engine fighter anywhere matched this combination of reach and capability. The 304th Fighter Group, nicknamed the Pioneer Mustang Group, received its first P-51Bs during November 1943. Operating from Boxted in Essex, these pilots technically served under the 9th Air Force, but were immediately committed to supporting 8th Air Force bombing campaigns. Commander Colonel Kenneth Martin had mere days to transition his entire pilot roster from P-47s to this revolutionary new fighter. Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Duncan, later commanding the 353rd Fighter Group, flew one of the initial orientation sorties and afterward recalled his impressions. "The moment my wheels left the runway, I understood we possessed something unprecedented. The Mustang responded like a thoroughbred compared to the lumbering Thunderbolt. It was nimble, fast, and most crucially, it carried sufficient fuel to fly forever." The first P-51B combat mission launched on December 1, 1943, a fighter sweep across Belgium and France. A follow-up escort mission occurred on December 5, covering Amiens during a comparatively short-range bombing run. 16 P-51Bs accompanied the bombers, functioning more as an operational test than comprehensive escort coverage. No German interceptors appeared, yet the mission validated the aircraft's fundamental suitability for high-altitude escort operations. December 13th brought the milestone moment, a long-range escort mission to Kiel, 490 miles distant, a distance previously considered unreachable for Allied fighters. The impact resonated immediately across both air forces. German pilots intercepting what they anticipated would be undefended bombers over northern Germany encountered fresh, aggressive American fighters deep within Reich airspace. The final fortnight of 1943 witnessed intensified operations as the 8th Air Force tested the Mustang's limits. On December 20th, P-51Bs escorted bombers to Bremen, downing 3 German fighters without suffering any losses themselves. The Luftwaffe, still adjusting to this new threat, persisted with their established tactics of waiting for escorts to depart. Except the escorts never left. German pilots frequently misidentified the P-51B as a P-47 from distance, confidently expecting it to turn back at any moment. When the Mustang continued eastward past the Thunderbolt's fuel limit, puzzlement transformed into consternation. Allied intelligence intercepted radio transmissions, capturing German controllers repeatedly questioning their pilots about fighter types and positions, struggling to accept that American escorts had penetrated so deep into Germany. Major Klaus Mitusch, commanding 3 JG-26, immediately grasped the strategic implications. Following a December 30th interception where Mustangs pursued his fighters all the way to their landing approach, he reportedly informed his pilots the air war had fundamentally transformed. "Our sanctuary no longer exists." March 4, 1944, 25,000 feet above Brandenburg. Through scattered clouds beneath, Berlin sprawled across the landscape unmistakably visible, the capital of the Reich, the seat of Nazi power, the city Hermann Göring had sworn would never see enemy bombers. Above it, in tight formation, flew 660 American heavy bombers, and woven through protective patterns around them were countless single-engine fighters bearing American insignia. This first American fighter escort to Berlin represented far more than tactical accomplishment. It shattered the psychological foundation of German invincibility. Colonel Donald Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, had piloted his 3 Mustang squadrons through the historic 1,100-mile round journey. The 4th Fighter Group had acquired their P-51Bs on February 28, 1944, and just 4 days later achieved what German leadership had declared absolutely impossible. For Luftwaffe pilots scrambling to intercept, the sight seemed surreal. They had been instructed that Allied fighters could never reach Berlin. The distance proved too great, entirely impossible for single-engine aircraft. Yet there they were, fresh and aggressive after flying 500 miles, while German defenders consumed fuel simply taking off. The subsequent battle erupted with savage intensity. The Luftwaffe scrambled over 200 fighters to defend Berlin, yet they encountered not exhausted bomber crews, but fresh, hungry Mustang pilots possessing altitude superiority and superior machines. The 4th Fighter Group alone claimed 15 confirmed kills. More importantly, numerous German attacks disintegrated before reaching the bomber formations. For American pilots, the P-51B represented an awakening, regarding what fighter design could achieve. Captain Donald Gentile had earned his reputation as one of the war's finest Mustang aces in the 4th Fighter Group, and he never forgot his first moments in the cockpit. Everything we'd been promised showed up the moment we fired up those engines, he would later reflect. The speed was breathtaking, the maneuverability gave us confidence in a dogfight, and that incredible range meant we could follow the bombers anywhere they needed to go. The P-51B's cockpit felt snug around a pilot's shoulders, but every inch of that space served a purpose. Sitting directly behind that inline engine meant your eyes had a clear path forward, a stark contrast to the radial-engined P-47, whose massive power plant blocked half of what you needed to see. When the bubble canopy arrived on the D models, visibility improved even more, but even the earlier B variants gave pilots a fighting chance to spot danger approaching from any angle. Lieutenant Robert Powell flew with the 352nd Fighter Group, and he knew better than anyone what those long missions extracted from a man. Hour after hour stretched out in that seat, breathing recycled oxygen above 10,000 feet, where the air itself became the enemy. Your mouth transformed into sandpaper. Your spine screamed from the weight of the parachute and dingy pack beneath you. Your neck muscles burned from constantly scanning the sky, twisting to check every angle for the grey silhouettes that meant German fighters. Yet despite all that pain and discomfort, Powell knew something else mattered more. We had what it took to get the job done, and that made every bit of suffering worth it. When Mustangs first appeared in the skies above Berlin, shock rippled through the German command structure. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring stared in disbelief when reports arrived. German fighters had spotted enemy escorts far beyond what should have been possible. When his officers pressed him with gun camera footage showing American Mustangs cruising over the Reich's capital, Göring reportedly uttered words that would echo through history. "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the game was finished." Though historians debate whether those exact words survived in documentation, everyone agrees the sentiment captured something true about that moment. German leadership finally understood they'd lost something fundamental. The strategic consequences were staggering. Every defensive plan rested on one simple assumption. German airspace beyond the bomber escort's range remained a fortress. Manufacturing complexes, training facilities, and aircraft assembly plants had been built deep in central Germany's heart precisely because strategists believed them untouchable. Fighter attacks could never reach that far. But now American fighters ranged across the entire continent, hitting airfields near Prague, battling German interceptors over Munich, and pushing bombers all the way to targets in the heart of the Reich. Major Günther Rahl, credited with 275 victories, watched this transformation unfold from the cockpit. The Mustang didn't just prolong the bombing campaign, Rahl understood. It fundamentally changed the nature of air warfare itself. We lost the ability to pick our moments and places to fight. They selected when and where combat would happen. We simply reacted. German pilots tried response after response. Sturmgruppen units appeared, FW-190s stripped of everything except armor and firepower, designed to smash through fighter screens and attack bombers up close. But these ponderous assault aircraft crumbled under the Mustang's superior speed and agility. Mass formations attacked in coordinated waves, entire Gruppen striking together. American numbers and performance proved sufficient to counter even these desperate tactics. Between February 20th and 25 in 1944, an operation called Big Week demonstrated just how thoroughly the air war had transformed. The 8th Air Force launched Operation Argument, specifically targeting German aircraft production, with Mustangs maintaining escort throughout every mission. 6 days of intensive combat saw American bombers complete 3,300 sorties, while fighters flew 3,673 more, losing 226 bombers but destroying over 500 German fighters. The numbers told only part of the story. That Luftwaffe loss included experienced combat pilots, veterans with years of missions behind them, irreplaceable experts the Germans couldn't simply replace. General James Doolittle commanded the 8th Air Force, and in January 1944 he issued orders that changed everything. Fighter pilots would no longer simply shepherd bombers to their targets. Instead, they'd hunt. Seek out the Luftwaffe wherever it could be found, destroy it. Captain John Godfrey flew with the 4th Fighter Group, and he described how this new philosophy felt in practice. Once the bombers dropped their loads, we'd get aggressive. We'd dive down to the deck, strafe airfields, catch German fighters in vulnerable moments as they tried to land or take off. The entire tactical equation had flipped. The mathematics now favored the Allies so overwhelmingly that German pilot losses became unsustainable. January 1944 saw the Luftwaffe lose 1,311 pilots. February brought 2,121 losses. March claimed another 2,115. Many were experienced veterans. Meanwhile, American training programs churned out 11,000 new pilots monthly, replacements arriving faster than losses mounted. The numerical advantage kept widening. The P-51 represented more than extended range. It showcased American manufacturing capability and technological sophistication. The K-14 computing gun sight, arriving in late 1944, gave Mustang pilots an edge in deflection, shooting they'd never enjoyed before. This gyroscopic marvel calculated lead automatically based on range and the target's rate of turn, transforming accuracy rates. Those 650 caliber Browning machine guns, while less devastating individually than German cannons, delivered advantages in volume and rate of fire. A P-51 pilot could unleash 1,880 rounds total, roughly 30 seconds of continuous fire. German fighters armed with cannon had ammunition for maybe 10 seconds. Prolonged dogfights favored pilots who could keep pulling triggers. Major Heinz Bayer, a German ace with 220 victories, recognized this qualitative difference in everything about the Mustang. It wasn't simply another fighter aircraft, Bayer later reflected. It was a complete weapons system. Every component worked together toward a single purpose. We flew excellent machines, but nothing that integrated all the elements so completely. Yet behind the statistics and technical specifications lay human suffering few could comprehend. Teenage boys from Iowa farms and Bavarian villages battled each other in sub-zero darkness 6 miles above the Earth. Some died mercifully fast, their aircraft disintegrating in seconds. Others faced fates far worse, flesh burned beyond recognition, limbs severed by cannon fire, slow descents through frozen air in parachutes shredded by bullets. Lieutenant William Wisner of the 352nd Fighter Group shot down a Bf-109 on March 8, 1944, and watched helplessly as its pilot ejected. The parachute deployed successfully, but the pilot's body was engulfed in flames. I watched him struggling to extinguish the fire on his flight suit as he fell through the sky, Wisner would remember. Nobody could help. Nobody could stop what was happening. German pilot Walter Schuck from JG-7 described how combat had fundamentally changed its character. We had been knights jousting with honor in 1943, he recalled, suggesting a kind of fairness. By 1944, we were hunted animals. Mustangs pursued us into our own airfields, circled overhead while we attempted landing, then attacked. No sanctuary existed anywhere. Confidence that had sustained German pilots in 1943 evaporated by mid-1944. Letters home, intercepted and filed away in archives, revealed mounting despair. One pilot wrote in April 1944, "We launch every mission expecting most of us won't return alive. The Americans are omnipresent, always above us, always with more ammunition and fuel. They're not going anywhere." By spring 1944, the Mustang's range enabled a campaign targeting something fundamental: German oil production. Synthetic plants at Luna, Politz, and Brooks, previously untouchable, now faced regular precision bombing with full fighter protection. The consequences devastated the Luftwaffe. Aviation fuel production plummeted from 175,000 tons in April 1944 to just 30,000 by July, then collapsed to 10,000 tons in September. Training missions stopped entirely. New pilots arrived at squadrons with as little as 50 hours total flying time, compared to American pilots boasting 300 to 400 hours. Commander Johannes Steinhoff watched the crisis unfold from his position, commanding JG-7. "We possessed the world's first operational jet fighter, the Me-260, capable of 540 miles per hour," Steinhoff explained. yet we couldn't fuel them adequately for combat operations. I witnessed dozens of these magnificent machines sitting dormant while Mustangs owned the sky above us. June 6, 1944, brought the complete picture into focus. On D-Day, the Luftwaffe managed a mere 319 sorties over France against 14,674 Allied sorties. Only 2 German fighters appeared anywhere near the invasion beaches. Mustang and Allied fighters established such overwhelming dominance that the entire operation unfolded under nearly unchallenged air protection. One of those 2 sorties was flown by Oberleutnant Joseph Priller of JG-26, accompanied by his wingman. They made a single strafing run along Sword Beach before escape became critical. Priller later described that mission as suicide, masquerading as duty, surviving only because surprised Allied pilots couldn't react quickly enough to the solo pair of FW-190s racing across the beach. Mustang duties expanded beyond escort missions into fighter bombing roles. Pilots discovered they possessed remarkable effectiveness at train busting, destroying locomotives with concentrated machine gun fire. A single Mustang could carry 2 500-pound bombs or 10 5-inch rockets alongside its guns, making it formidable in ground attack roles. Captain Charles Chuck Yeager, destined to break the sound barrier, flew P-51s with the 357th Fighter Group. On October 12, 1944, he shot down 5 Bf-109s in a single engagement. But Yeager also grappled with what that capability meant. We transitioned from protecting bombers to attacking anything moving. We strafed trains, recognizing they might carry civilians. War had become total, and the Mustang gave us the ability to pursue it anywhere across German territory. Germany's technological answer came through revolutionary aircraft. The Me-262 jet fighter and the rocket-powered Me-163 Comet. The Me-262 approached 540 miles per hour, nearly 100 miles per hour faster than the P-51D. Experienced pilots in these jets could slice through bomber formations and disappear before Mustang pilots could react. Yet technological innovation couldn't alter the fundamental equation. Adolf Galland flew Me-262s with JV-44 in 1945, shooting down 7 Allied aircraft. But Galland understood the hopelessness. "We were a handful of tigers confronting hundreds of wolves," he later reflected. For every jet fighter they faced, the Americans possessed 50 Mustangs. And those Mustangs could patrol above German airfields, waiting for vulnerable moments when jets struggled through takeoff and landing phases. The jet engines of this era remained temperamental, demanding meticulous throttle control and extended runway requirements. Mustang pilots learned to exploit precisely these weaknesses. Lieutenant Urban Drew of the 361st Fighter Group shot down 2 Me-262s on October 7, 1944, by catching them during their approach to landing when vulnerability peaked. Those American fighters roared down from above with a terrible advantage. The German jets were already struggling, fuel gauges sitting on empty, engines throttled back for landing. They couldn't maneuver, they couldn't escape. They were sitting ducks against the diving Mustangs. By early 1945, the numbers simply didn't work anymore for Germany. The United States had built 15,486 P-51s during the entire war. Roughly 8,000 of those aircraft were flying combat missions over Europe. When the 8th Air Force reached peak strength in March of that year, they operated 14 fighter groups. Most of those groups flew Mustangs. We're talking about over 1,000 of these fighters in constant operation. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe could barely scrape together 300 to 400 serviceable aircraft on any single day, and these were scattered across the entire Reich. Fuel shortages meant a significant portion of those planes never got off the ground at all. The German pilot situation had become critical. Many of the men flying those remaining fighters were teenagers who had received minimal training. Some had barely more than 40 or 50 hours of actual flight time before they faced combat. The kill ratios told the brutal story. By 1945, Mustang pilots were destroying German aircraft at a rate of 10 to 1. For every Mustang shot down, pilots in these American fighters were taking down 10 enemy planes. Lieutenant Colonel John Mayer commanded the 352nd Fighter Group. When the war ended, his record stood at 24 aerial victories, all achieved while flying Mustangs. He offered a grim assessment of what the fighting had become by late in the war. "It wasn't combat anymore," he said bluntly. "It was execution. We would find a German airfield, circle overhead, and simply shoot down anyone who attempted to take off or land." The Mustang had transformed the entire Reich into a killing ground. After the war ended, captured German pilots provided testimony that revealed just how devastating the Mustang had been to their cause. Adolf Galland, a general in the Luftwaffe's fighter force, reflected on this in his memoirs. "The P-51 Mustang," he wrote, "was perhaps the most consequential fighter aircraft of the entire Second World War. Until it appeared in our skies," Galland explained, "we controlled when air battles happened and how they unfolded over Germany. Once that fighter arrived, we never managed to seize the initiative again." Major Heinz Knoke, who survived the war with 33 confirmed kills, was even more direct in his assessment. "The Mustang killed the Luftwaffe," he stated, "not the bomber offensive, not the invasion. It was that fighter, the one that could fly all the way to Poland and back. We transformed from hunters into hunted in just 3 months." The testimony from younger German pilots who had entered combat late in the war carried particular weight. These men had faced experienced American pilots flying superior aircraft while possessing almost no combat experience themselves. One pilot who was captured described his baptism by fire. "I completed my first combat mission in November of 1944. I had only 55 hours of total flight time on my logbook. 3 missions later, I encountered Mustangs for the first time." He paused, remembering the shock. "They were everywhere. In that moment, I understood something terrible. We hadn't just lost the war. We had lost the sky itself. The Mustang's impact extended far beyond the dogfights themselves. By allowing bombers to penetrate deep into Germany without suffering catastrophic losses, the fighter escort enabled a systematic dismantling of German industry. German oil production, the Reich's critical vulnerability, had been reduced to just 10% of what the nation required by March 1945. The transportation network was in ruins. Trains couldn't run. Trucks couldn't move supplies. Raw materials couldn't reach the factories that desperately needed them. German aircraft manufacturing continued at impressive production rates through dispersed factory locations, but those planes became useless artifacts. There was no fuel to operate them. There were no adequately trained pilots to fly them. General Karl Spaatz, who commanded United States strategic air forces in Europe, recognized the Mustang's central role in all of this. "The P-51 was the decisive weapon of the European air campaign," he stated. "It made the daylight bombing offensive possible. It enabled the invasion of Europe. It made the systematic destruction of German military capacity achievable." But beyond the strategic calculations lay something more profound. German pilots underwent a fundamental transformation through their war experience. Men who had entered combat in 1943 as confident warriors emerged from the conflict, if they survived, as changed individuals. Many later identified specific moments when certainty about victory collapsed. Almost without exception, those moments arrived when they encountered Mustangs flying deep over Germany, where such fighters shouldn't have existed. Some German pilots experienced a different kind of transformation. They shifted from viewing Americans as enemies toward genuine admiration. After witnessing the material abundance that American industry could produce and experiencing the humane treatment they received as prisoners of war, many Luftwaffe veterans began questioning everything they had been taught about the Americans. Nazi propaganda painted one picture. Reality showed something completely different. The contrast devastated both morale and the ideological foundations these pilots had been standing on. The P-51 represented something revolutionary in fighter design itself. The laminar flow wing design demonstrated what was possible when drag could be dramatically reduced. When American and British engine technology merged with American airframe design, something extraordinary emerged. This collaborative model would influence international military cooperation for decades through NATO and similar alliances. The Mustang changed how military planners thought about fighter aircraft fundamentally. Before the war, conventional military doctrine held that fighters were defensive weapons meant to protect specific locations. They were supposed to have short range and limited operational scope. The P-51 overturned that entire concept. It proved that fighters could operate as strategic weapons, projecting power hundreds of miles from their home bases. This insight shaped everything from the F-86 Sabre used in Korea to modern fighters that can operate globally when equipped with aerial refueling capability. The sheer statistics of the Mustang's contribution remain staggering. 15,486 aircraft were manufactured. Across Europe, Mustang pilots destroyed 4,870 enemy aircraft in aerial combat and another 4,950 aircraft on the ground. They destroyed 4,131 locomotives. They flew over 9,000 combat sorties and accumulated more than 213,000 combat hours in the air. Operational losses reached over 1,300 aircraft. The kill ratio in air combat exceeded 11-1, unprecedented in the history of aerial warfare. Yet statistics alone cannot capture the true significance. The Mustang broke something inside the Luftwaffe. It shattered their will to fight. It enabled the Normandy invasion. It compressed the timeline toward Germany's defeat by months, possibly longer. The transition happened with breathtaking speed. In October 1943, the Luftwaffe commanded German airspace. They shot down American bombers almost at will. By March 1944, Mustangs were escorting those same bombers to Berlin. By June 1944, the Luftwaffe had become combat ineffective. By April 1945, it had ceased existing as a military force. This wasn't a gradual decline, it was a collapse. When Mustangs appeared over Germany, it triggered a cascading series of defeats from which recovery became impossible. Every pilot lost couldn't be properly replaced. Every destroyed aircraft reduced training capacity. Every successful bombing escort mission pushed American commanders to strike deeper, strike harder, strike more frequently. The pilot losses document this catastrophe. In 1943, the Luftwaffe lost 2,967 pilots. In 1944, losses jumped to 12,037 pilots. From January through May of 1945, another 4,238 pilots were lost. Average pilot experience plummeted as casualties mounted. In 1943, pilots typically had 250 hours or more before facing combat. By early 1944, that figure had dropped to 150 hours. By late 1944, new pilots were entering combat with 80 hours. By 1945, rookies were flying their first missions with perhaps 40 to 50 hours of experience. Perhaps the Mustang's greatest weapon was psychological. It demolished the myth of German technological superiority. It demonstrated what American industrial capacity could achieve. It proved that democratic systems could produce superior weapons. German pilots who had mocked American bombers in 1943 were, by 1945, refusing to fly suicide missions against Mustang-escorted formations. Young Luftwaffe pilots, raised on Nazi ideology, experiencing profound cognitive dissonance when confronted by American material superiority. Everything they had absorbed about racial supremacy, German technical excellence, and American weakness stood shattered by an elegant, powerful fighter dominating their own skies. 40 years after the war's conclusion, in 1985, American and German fighter pilots gathered for a reunion in San Antonio, Texas. Conversations at that gathering revealed how deeply the Mustang had affected both sides. Colonel Clarence "Bud" Anderson, who had flown 116 combat missions in Mustangs and scored 16¼ aerial victories, sat across from Oberst Günther Rahl, Germany's third-highest scoring ace with 95 confirmed kills. Rahl raised his glass in a toast. To the P-51 Mustang, he said, the fighter that won the air war. We possessed excellent aircraft. We had superb pilots. We were defending our own homeland. But you had the Mustang, and that altered everything. Walter Schuck, who had transitioned from flying FW-190s to the Me-262 jets, added his perspective. We went from laughing at unescorted bombers to taking cover from Mustangs in just 4 months. No military force in history has experienced such a complete reversal. General Johannes Steinhoff, his face still bearing scars from his Me-262 crash in April 1945, reflected on the moment everything changed. "We laughed at your bombers in 1943 because we genuinely could not comprehend that America could produce a fighter with sufficient range to escort them to Berlin. The P-51 taught us the danger of underestimating adversaries." Steinhoff paused, his voice carrying the weight of memory. "When did we know the war was lost? That day in March 1944, when we looked skyward and saw Mustangs above Berlin. In that instant, every German pilot recognized the truth. We had already been defeated. The reversal from German pilots laughing at American bombers to cowering from Mustang fighters represents perhaps the most complete transformation in military history. Within less than 6 months, from October 1943 through March 1944, the Luftwaffe went from commanding the skies to being hunted. They shifted from predator to prey, from confident to condemned. The P-51 Mustang functioned as the catalyst, but it symbolized something larger than itself: American industrial strength, democratic cooperation between nations, technological innovation driven by necessity rather than rigid ideology. German pilots who had accepted as absolute truth that American democracy represented national weakness discovered instead a society capable of mobilizing unprecedented unity and productive capacity. The laughter echoing from German airfields in October 1943 was based on a reasonable technical assessment. No single-engine fighter had previously demonstrated the range necessary to escort bombers from England to Berlin and back. What German strategists failed to anticipate was American ingenuity, the successful fusion of American and British technological expertise, and industrial capacity sufficient to manufacture thousands of superb fighters in months instead of years. When Mustangs appeared over Berlin on March 4, 1944, the laughter stopped. A terrible recognition replaced it. Everything these pilots had believed about their enemies, about their own superiority, about how the war would conclude, all of it had been fundamentally wrong. The P-51 Mustang did more than win the air war. It shattered illusions. It destroyed myths. It demonstrated that technological dominance in warfare flows not from ideology, but from industrial capacity, international cooperation, and the innovative power of democratic societies. German pilots who lived through this never forgot the lesson. In their memoirs, in interviews, at reunions, they consistently pointed to a single moment as the turning point. Not the Normandy invasion, not the fall of Berlin, but that specific moment when American fighters appeared where they were impossible, escorting bombers to the Reich's heart with fuel remaining for combat. Nearly 80 years after the war's end, the P-51 Mustang endures as the supreme symbol of American air superiority during the Second World War. It is the aircraft that silenced the laughter and ended the Reich's command of its own skies. The German pilots who laughed in October 1943 learned by March 1944 that their confidence had been premature. By May 1945, most were gone, unable to reflect on how completely they had misjudged their enemy. The historical lesson persists. It teaches the danger of dismissing one's opponents, the tremendous power of industrial democracy, and how profoundly a single weapons system can alter history's course. The Mustang proved something fundamental about modern warfare. Courage and skill remain necessary, but they are insufficient. Victory flows to those nations that can manufacture more, train better, and innovate faster. The transformation was absolute, irreversible, devastating. The laughter became silence. The P-51 Mustang wrote its name across European skies as the fighter that shattered the Luftwaffe's dominance and extinguished Nazi Germany's hopes for victory.